G'day folks, Scott here. Today I'm reviewing Ash vs Evil Dead, the complete series. Now, to say I'm a big fan of the Evil Dead franchise would be a massive understatement. At the end of this video I'll put up a link where you can watch a series I did called Childhood Trauma from horror movies. And I stated in that the original Evil Dead movie was the last movie that actually really scared me as a kid. And it's always stuck with me, I just love that. I love all three of those movies. So I guess this show is 100% based on your love or like for the original Evil Dead trilogy, being Evil Dead 2, and Army of Darkness. If you've never seen those movies, I can't say you're going to get much out of this show. It's somewhat of an acquired taste, a wonderful acquired taste, but you really should start with the original movies and go from there. I'm not going to harp on too much about the original films because I'm going to do retrospective reviews of each of them later on down the track. But that's your fundamental thing. If you love, like I love, the Evil Dead franchise, then this show is for you. If you don't, try them first. That's all I've got to say. So the first season of this was made in 2015. Evil Dead fans had been wanting a sequel to Army of Darkness and for them to continue the franchise forever. Obviously in 2013 we got the sequel, reboot, remake, whatever you want to call it, made by Fede Alvarez, which, I like the movie. A lot of people don't. It's not perfect, but it got more right than it got wrong. And in a world where horror movie reboots and remakes are usually disgustingly bad, that's certainly one of the better ones. So I thought that they were just going to keep going with that and that we were just done with the original Sam Raimi, Robert Tappert, Ivan Raimi, and Bruce Campbell combination. Obviously, those guys produced the reboot, but they didn't write or directly involved in it. So then they came around and announced that, given its popularity, I guess, and the fact that Bruce Campbell going to conventions and cons for years has had huge amounts of fans and adoration, they've decided to give it a go. But instead of going for the cinema, they've gone to a cable network called Starz, and they've made a 10-episode season. Now, when I first heard they were only half-an-hour episodes, I was a bit like, that's a bit weak, that's probably really only 24 to 25 minutes of footage per episode. But in the long run, it was a fantastic idea. I think that shorter runtime made me crave them. In America, I believe this is available on Netflix. In Australia, it's on a different streaming service called Stan. Stan's not overly expensive. If this is the only way you have access to see this show, then I strongly recommend you do so. But just last week before I did this, after seeing Season 3, I went to a local retailer and bought Season 1 and Season 2 on Blu-ray, and they were like $15 each. They're not expensive, and they're totally worth the money. There's some pretty cool special features and a bunch of director's commentaries and cast commentaries on there that were, as usual with Bruce Campbell being involved, very funny. So Season 1 picks up, obviously, before I go any further, this is all spoilers, right? I'm assuming that if you're watching this, you've seen these three, or that you don't care about spoilers. There's your warning. So Season 1 is set, 30-odd years after Army of Darkness. Ash is still Ash. He's still working the, hardware store, electronics store, kind of department store kind of life. That was a smart way for them to introduce his two basic sidekicks for all three seasons, being Pablo and Kelly. And we meet them throughout the first season, Pablo specifically in the first episode. So Ash is still Ash. In this he's a little further down the track. He's very boozy. He smokes lots of weed. He sleeps with lots of chicks. And, he's got this wooden hand and he just does what he does. He's living in a trailer in some trailer park and just being Ash. He, of course, read from the book again like an idiot, reawakened the evil, and the series goes on from there. Season 1 for me is great, but it is a bit of a mixed bag. I like some episodes more than I like other episodes, and I guess for me, being a old school horror fan who loves practical gore, I had some issues with some of the CGI gore in this series, which was done pretty poorly in Season 1. Some of the beheadings and the fake blood and things like that were pretty bad. Some of the practical effects were fantastic, obviously, but I thought there was a bit too much CG in the first series for me personally, but that didn't detract from the fact that I loved it. Where the series really picked up for me and just went off on its own was, obviously the fan service. When we were introduced to Lucy Lawless's character Ruby, and it turns out she's tracking Ash to try and get the Necromonicon, she has his hand from Evil Dead 2 that he cut off in the infamous fight, And seeing that again was fantastic. This hand would point to wherever the direction was that she should go to follow Ash, and that was a great touch. throughout the course of that season, obviously the big kicker was Ash found out that the only way he was ever going to rid himself of all of this evil was to go back to where it all started. And that meant going back to the cabin from the original movies, taking the book back there and apparently burying it in their basement to be done with all of this, sort of put the evil back to sleep. So obviously, throughout the series, there's there's a whole bunch of, getting to know you for Pablo and Kelly to develop them as characters, and Ruby and the female cop that Ash sort of had a relationship with. I can't remember her name right now. And they all lead to this point in the cabin. The highlight for me of the whole season was how wonderfully well made the cabin was. The art department and production crew who built that thing put in so much love and fan service and went back to original photos and blueprints and whatever. It's perfect. The tool shed, the cabin, the main living area, kitchens, bedrooms, like everything, t-shirts, books, photos, like everything that was there before is there again, and I absolutely loved that. This led to obviously the Hand growing another Ash and getting a great Ash versus Ash fight, just like in Army of Darkness. And the series ended, obviously on Ash being a pussy and having a truce with Ruby so that he could quit fighting and just go to Jacksonville, which was his dream place to go and live out the rest of his life. So he did that, and that brings about the end of Season 1. Season 2, for me, really picked up their game. I love this season. It's definitely my favorite of the three. This begins in Jacksonville with Ash like working out or running or just being out getting drunk at a bar every day, sleeping with chicks, getting pissed, using his chainsaw and his shotgun for completely inappropriate and unsafe recreational activities. Kelly and Pablo were still there working with him, but it turns out that Ruby, who had these weird no eyes, grey children things at the end of Season 1 when Pablo actually got this cover of the book on his face and he vomited up these babies, they got out of control, and it turns out they were working for a higher demon, and they were doing the wrong thing by Ruby, and she was in all kinds of trouble, and she had no choice other than to get Ash to help her. So evil comes to Jacksonville and they go off about their adventure. What I loved about this season is, like I complained about a little bit with Season 1, was a high amount of bad CGI gore. This one had so much amazing practical effects that it was just outstanding. I think it was episode 2, which is called The Morgue, where Ruby had hidden the book from her children inside a corpse in this morgue. Ash had found out about that and went there to try and find the book, and he's chainsawing open all these bodies looking for it and everything. And that obviously leads to one of the funniest parts in any Evil Dead ever, and one of the best practical effect gags I've ever seen, where a colon and anus from one of these corpses is possessed, and Ash has a big fight with it. He ends up being drawn headfirst up into the anus of this body, and his face is poking out of the autopsy hole in its stomach, and he's running around covered in shit, having a fight with this colon, and it's fantastic. It's a really hilarious, very well done scene. That season goes on with this tumultuous kind of like truce between Ash and Ruby. Ruby and Kelly spend a lot of time together, and it really develops Kelly. Ash sort of reconnects with a girl that he had a crush on in high school, and the whole season leads them back to Elk Grove, which is Ash's hometown. This was fantastic. I loved going back to this town that he hasn't been to in 30 odd years. I love that the fact that Evil Dead 1 and Evil Dead 2 have had this impact upon a community, where Ash has this nickname of Ashy Slashy, this guy who had taken all his friends out to a cabin in the woods and was basically accused of completely murdering and dismembering them and then going on the run for the rest of his life. So everyone thinks he's a homicidal maniac, and no one believes all these stories about ghosts and demons and all the things that actually happened. And it's fantastic, the amount of shit he takes from the citizens in that town, and they have this cool Ashy Slashy song they sing at him, and he obviously having to go home. This leads him back to his family home, where we meet Ash's father. Now, when I was a little kid, before Star Wars in the 70s, I was obsessed with a TV show called The $6 Million Man. He was probably my first, fiction hero as a child. I had this really cool action figure of him, like a, pretty big doll that, lifted stuff, and you could look through the back of his head. And, I used to love with the show that he would run that, car speeds, but they couldn't make that work in the show, so it was actually in slow motion with this strange ticking noise. I used to run around everywhere in slow motion as a kid replicating this. And the guy who played the $6 Million Man was an actor named Lee Majors. He also had a show in, I think, the 80s on TV that was called The Fall Guy, about stuntmen, but he hasn't been around in a long time, and he was cast as Ash's dad, and it was amazing. He was just as chauvinistic, just as racist, just as intolerant, just as antagonizing as Ash, even more so perhaps. And seeing Ash in that family dynamic where his dad just like berates him every chance he gets in the family home was brilliant. We also get introduced to Ash's friend from high school. I can't remember his name right now, but he was played by Ted Raimi, obviously another part of the Raimi brothers, who was a big part of the series and a big part of all of the Raimi work throughout the years. And they have an episode together, like right before Ash's car, the Delta gets possessed and has its own episode, which was great. But one of my favorite parts of this entire season, was there was an episode where they were trapped inside Ash's family home from all the townsfolk who basically want Ash dead for everything that's going wrong in the community, and they blame him for everything, and they're stuck in there. And Ash is going through the house, and he comes across his sister Cheryl's room. Now, Cheryl was my favorite Deadite from the original Evil Dead movie, hence the t-shirt. And they got the same actress to come back and play her again to torment Ash, and it was amazing. She was both in human form and in Deadite form, and she had a lot of fun with the role, and there's some really cool scenes. It turns out that her and Ted Raimi's character had an affair or some kind of relationship Ash didn't know about when they were teenagers. She obviously really plays on that. It's a fantastic episode, really cool, gory chainsaw decapitation for her at the end. Lots of humor. She maybe wasn't as violent and nasty as she was in the original movie, but it was such fan service and such, just brilliant storytelling to have her come back and to see her again and see them bounce off one another again. That was just great. So after, the townsfolk obviously see that Deadites and evil and stuff is real, Ash sort of becomes a quasi-hero to them, and they sort of back off on all that. This leads to the book getting sent off into this portal. Now, the main bad guy that shows up that I mentioned earlier in this season is this guy named Baal, who can get inside and imitate any person. He has his fingernail that like cuts people open and wears their skin and that. He was pretty cool. I didn't love him, but he was fine. And he, basically kicks Ash's ass and everything gets out of control and the Delta gets possessed and Pablo gets convinced to, because he's having all these recurring themes, obviously with the book, the Sumerian writing showing up on his skin and him having flashbacks and premonitions and all these kind of like things that, on the more supernatural side of it, he gets convinced to throw the book into a portal that he's told destroys it. That obviously doesn't. That brings Baal about and causes all kinds of trouble. And so it ends towards the end of the series where there's like a fantastic episode where Baal is really messing with Ash, and there's the whole mental asylum episodes with the Ashy Slashy puppet. All of that again was fantastic and funny. It was cool seeing Ash go bad for a little while. The puppet was hilarious. The fight between Kelly and the puppet in that cell was great. It was very reminiscent of Ash fighting his hand from Evil Dead 2. Like, that was great. And then it turns out that the only way that they can figure out how to sort this out is to travel back in time to get the book before it was destroyed, before everything went wrong, and to try and get to the book before Ash and his friends went to that cabin in the original Evil Dead movie to put an end to everything, right? Pablo gets killed by Baal. Ash is devastated, obviously. He wants to bring him back, and this is another reason that traveling back in time can do this. So Ruby and Ash and Kelly do this spell. They travel back to 1980s. You see Elk Grove for a little bit in the 80s, and then they go out to the cabin. This leads to more incredible fan service. They go back to the cabin. Of course, everything goes wrong. Nothing's what they expect. Ash gets to the place. He gets down into the basement, and he comes across Henrietta, the old lady who was in the basement from before Evil Dead 1, and that leads to all the events that happen in Evil Dead 2. It was great. There's a big fight down there. Of course, Henrietta becomes, the beast Henrietta that Ash fought in Evil Dead 2. There's all kinds of trouble with him trying to get the book, getting trapped down with her again. She's fantastic, played by Ted Raimi again. The suit is very reminiscent of the original one. They did a great job of recreating it, as they did a great job of recreating the cabin. I can't go on enough about that cabin. It was brilliantly reimagined and redone. She transforms into the neck monster with the head, just like the first thing with the swallow the soul, and they have a big fight, and obviously that season ends. The young Ruby from the 80s who was still looking for the Kandarian dagger, and the book kills the Ruby that Ash and Kelly had become friends with. Ash vanquishes evil, goes back to Elk Grove, becomes a hero, his love and life, and then it reveals that Ruby's still around. Season 3 kicks on from there. Season 3 obviously being the last season it's gonna ever have. This one, really goes out and introduces that Ash had a wife we'd never heard about. They'd had a child named Brandy, who they introduced in the first episode. Brandy and Ash have this, very on-again, off-again thing. She obviously doesn't like him, doesn't like the abandonment daddy issues. Throughout the course of the series, though, they bond, and, that's fantastic. What I would have thought after the I'm in the butt, head in a corpse's asshole gag from season 2 was how they were going to top that in season 3. And I wouldn't say that they topped it, but between the sperm bank and all the jizz jokes in there, and then the fight with the baby, so Ruby brings about and resurrects or gives birth to, from the book, a little baby that grows into Ash, and there's more Ash versus Ash action. But when that thing's a kid and it's running around just menacing people, it was got like an organic chainsaw hand, which was awesome. There's a large foreign girl who Ruby keeps captive in this house, and that girl ends up, obviously dying. And there's a great fight between Ash and this baby, where the baby is coming in and out of the lady's vagina, in and out of the head gap where she'd been decapitated, and it's like this really, really well done gag. And again, it's really over the top. Like, I'm constantly in awe of the fact that they can come up with things where I'm like, I can't believe you did that. This is great, brilliantly done. This season around, Ruby's trying to bring back another demon, I guess, this girl that she was, aligned with in hell, trying to do whatever it is they were trying to do, and they're trying to prevent the Dark Ones, who were spoken about in season 1 as being the ones who, wrote, or who were owners of this book and wanted to bring around the end of the world. Ruby, it turned out, obviously had written the book. So throughout the course of this season, Kelly goes off and, she confronts Ruby. They have a huge, gory, amazing fight, and Kelly ends up dying, and Ruby brings back this British girl, like a demon, I can't remember what, into Kelly's body. So then we've got Bad Kelly for a while. It's a good season. I still think season 2 is the best. It culminates, of course, towards the end with this, amazing relationship developing between Ash and Brandy. And, by the end of the season, them cracking these pathetically unfunny jokes together and high-fiving each other and stuff. Like, the dynamic between them as time went on was amazing. There was portal travel in between the world of the dead and the world of the living, and different ghost effects and demons and stuff. It was all fantastic. The season obviously culminates with this huge Kandarian demon being summoned into Elk Grove, and the army showing up and fighting and war and all this kind of stuff, and it gets completely out of hand. And Ash has the fantastic finale with this demon where he's in a tank and he takes it out and everything, and this leads to, the end of the series, where he's run off to, obviously sacrifice himself to save Kelly and Pablo and Brandy. And then, he wakes up. Now, what I love about the end of this season was such a throwback to the special edition of Army of Darkness, where instead of ending up back in S-Mart, like in the theatrical edition, he ended up in the future because he drank too many drops of that potion that the wizard had given him, and he screwed up and woke up in the apocalypse and the world had ended. This, has him, wake up way in the future, and there's a, sci-fi looking chick, who's all robot, and you can see through her and stuff, and she's awoken him to come and help fight the evil again. And it sets up for more that we'll never get. But I like, just like the end of the original trilogy, it has an ambiguous ending that suggests more without actually, you needing to really ever see it. Now, before I saw the end of the season, I was, really concerned that they had said, this is it, we've cancelled it. And a lot of times when you hear about shows being cancelled when they haven't finished airing yet, I get real concerns that they're not going to be able to wrap it up. There's not going to be a proper conclusion. They're not going to be able to end the things the way they would have liked to have ended them. Now, they may not have got to end this the way they wanted to end it, but they did end it very well, and it seemed like a natural, organic ending to the 3 seasons. And I'm more than satisfied with it. I was really concerned going up to that last episode how they were going to actually pull that off. And it seems that obviously they'd, wrapped things up nicely before it was cancelled. Bruce Campbell obviously came out a few days later and officially retired from playing Ash Williams ever again. Like in a world where people say that kind of stuff all the time and then things might change down the track, who knows, but I'm satisfied with that as well. I think, like with everything, leave you wanting more is better than to overdo it. In Bruce Campbell's words, we basically got another 15-hour Evil Dead movie. 3 seasons, half an hour an episode, and they were fantastic, and I'm thoroughly happy with what I got. And, if you're going to end on a high and leave me wanting more, that's a good thing. Now, whether they now go and follow on from the Fede Alvarez 2013 reboot and follow Mia's character or anything, I'm happy to have another crack at that. I'm more than happy for them to keep doing things within the Evil Dead universe. But Ash, I think, I'm quite satisfied with him. Have reached the end of his story arc, and I like where it's gone. If they do something in 20 years' time when he's a geriatric old man, so be it. But for now, I'm feeling pretty satisfied. So I think that's really all I've got to say about them. Like, I really adored it. I'm very happy to have seen it all. I'm happy to own them. I'll rewatch them. For me, they fit in so well with those original 3 movies that I've got this big Evil Dead experience that I'm going to have forever, which is brilliant. So, yeah, if you've watched all this and you haven't seen them, I'm sorry for all the spoilers. If you've seen them on cable and never bought the Blu-rays, do that. Throw them some money. Watch them again. Listen to the commentaries. Watch the little production special features. They were pretty good. I'll be back to review Deadpool 2 later this week. That comes out here in a couple of days. As always, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.